Greetings, Poe fans. Welcome to another edition of Poe Unplugged. I am Carmen Bolden.
And I am Jeannie Smith, and we are
The Poetastic Two.
Come zoom with us into the Unbook Club dedicated to the works of Mr. Edgar Allan Poe.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our edition of Poe Unplugged The Raven. And Jeannie's going to kind of get us started with introductions.
Hey, welcome everyone. And this is just going to be basically informal because, well, some of the people here know each other and have been here more than once, but we do have our special guest tonight with Jason Markiewitz, who's going to be sharing his love of Poe and how he has brought it into the 21st century. So I'm going to start off. Of course, you know, Carmen, there's me, and we are Poe fanatics, if you haven't figured that out by now. I know Micah usually makes it in chat, but he's coming from, it's so good to see everyone. He's coming from California. He is a magician that loves Poe.
Yes.
So Holly, you can go from there, and then we'll keep going down until everybody introduces themselves, and then we'll get started.
Yep. Hey, hi guys. Holly, Michelle do the kids book Poe Reimagined. Love Poe, obviously.
Yes.
Okay, Keith. Well, unless your audio is not working.
Yeah.
Oh, Keith Thomas here. Big Poe fan from Roanoke, Virginia. I think I started out with Jeannie and Carmen when it was just the three of us, and I'm glad it's growing like it is.
Yes.
And I can say that was the one positive thing I can say about Facebook is I came across this. I'm happy that I have.
And we're happy you're with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, and then Crystal.
Hey everybody, I'm also a Poe fan, and I found this actually through my sister Holly. And excuse me in the bed, it's my cat time too. Fun fact, I got 6 cats on me.
Oh, goodness. And none of them are black.
None of them are black.
One's partly black.
Nothing wrong with that. Cats are all welcome here. We have our cats. You'll probably see mine giving you the butt sometime during the
Yes.
Who knows?
All right.
Virginia.
Yes.
Oh, is it my turn?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, I'm Virginia Poe. I'm actually one half of the podcast Beyond the Oblong Box. I was trying to see if Levi could join us tonight too, because he had some other stuff to do, you know, life. But yes, obviously, I also, how funny, I love Poe. Literally. And I also have cats who do also interrupt us during our podcasts from time to time, which is hilarious. But you know, Poe, cats, it all goes together.
It does. And Virginia's podcast is fantastic. So please check it out.
Thank you, Carmen.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I haven't listened to the new episode, but I haven't done Hot Frog yet, but I'm saving it. So.
Thanks.
Yes.
Yeah.
And like Mike said in the chat, happy belated 214th birthday to.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Carmen and I, along with Jason, did our first Facebook Live podcast on Thursday with a celebration to Poe's birthday.
Yes.
So,
it was fun.
That was a good toast at the end too.
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah.
it was. It was a great toast, and it was good drinks all the way around. Carmen's husband loves to play bartender, so
Yes.
we're always up for that one.
Yes, and Micah said, thanks to Facebook, I can finally watch the Poe Toaster. Yes, that's awesome. That is so cool.
Right.
All right. So Jason Markiewitz is our honored guest tonight for Poe Unplugged. So Jason, if you'll introduce yourself, and if you want to kind of start our talk on the Raven, we decided to talk about horror elements, but I know Jeannie and I talked about it more on the psychological level and things like that. So Jason, if you want to kind of take it and we'll roll with it from there.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for having me again. I really enjoyed our time on Thursday, and thank you for inviting me back. So I do audio drama production and voice acting, as well as theater acting and things as a hobby, but have been a large and long time fan of Edgar Allan Poe. So I started writing the script for The Raven back in 2011 when I was stationed in Las Vegas. And I just had an idea of how can I bring The Raven to more modern times. A lot of difficulties in reading old literature sometimes is not understanding the terminologies or not understanding the words or the language that's being used, and being able to bring some of that forward into more modern language and dialogue, but also some of the way that things are described to keep. And that one of the difficulties I had with The Raven was keeping the meter. So if you change a description, don't change the meter. Make sure that it flows the way that it should. Make sure that all of the baseline elements are the same. Make sure that the context is all the same, but that the listener can understand what's happening without needing a dictionary next to them. And that was important, especially in The Raven, because there are a lot of references and terminologies that are old and not something that is taught nowadays. And you have to have an extraordinary vocabulary sometimes to go through it and be able to really follow along with everything. I really love the original writing, and I didn't want to mess with it. I didn't want to destroy the context or change anything about it, but I wanted to bring it a little bit updated so that it could still be enjoyed by today's audience. I had the honor of having my daughter voice the character of Lenore in this production, and it's only a very small part, but I wanted to make sure to create multiple characters. So I created a disembodied voice narrator. You have the Raven as an individual character. You have the forlorn gentleman, as I call him, as a character. And then you have the echoed voice of Lenore. And amongst all of them, then you have all the atmospherics and the sounds that go with it. And it was a treat to produce.
That is really amazing. And I know when we did our live event on Poe's birthday, Jason really got to talking about how he comes up with the sounds for his productions. We could do a whole, I think, podcast just on how you come up with the sounds. And it was just amazing just to hear some of the things that he does for this. And so
I will give you a spoiler real quick. When you hear the fireplace in the background, my two sons created the fireplace. And so I had a 12-year-old at that time who was wrinkling a plastic bag. And then I had my 8-year-old at that time that was using bubble wrap and popping the bubble wrap to make the pops in the fireplace. So when you hear the fireplace going on, it's plastic bag and bubble wrap, and that's the fireplace.
Oh, that is very cool.
That's amazing.
Yes. All right. Well, I think since Jason has given us such a great introduction into his version of The Raven, why don't we go ahead and play the extended trailer so everybody can see that, and then we can kind of go into our discussion.
Great.
So let's move over there.
It would help if everybody muted also,
yes.
So that you don't get the reverb.
Yeah, I'll wait just a second.
How do I do that? Oh, wait there.
Let's see. Okay. All right, here we go.
No rain, nor wind, nor thunderclap can torment more my core. My soul, that to this very night still mourns my love, Lenore.
Now, upon a midnight dreary, while he pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while he nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping, rapping at his chamber door.
Who's there? 'Tis some visitor tapping on my chamber door. Yes, only this, and nothing more. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more.
Open here he flung the shutter, when, with many a flirt and flutter, from outside flew a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not a single bow or curtsy made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but, as if a noble lord or lady, perched above the chamber door.
Well, be that our sign of parting, bird or fiend of manner upstarting. Get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul has spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door.
Quoth the raven, Nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas, just above the chamber door. And its eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er the raven, streaming, throws its shadows on the floor.
Lenore, I miss you so.
And his soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted. Nevermore, nevermore, nevermore.
All right. That was awesome.
Cool. Thank you for the nice comments in chat too. Appreciate it.
Yes.
Yeah, that was amazing.
It was. And again, love all of the sounds and everything.
Yeah, great voice. I mean, your talking voice is nice, but I mean, your acting voice is very nice.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and that's and I know what you're saying, because that was one of the hardest part about getting into audiobook narration is they say no one ever likes their voice. And I was like, yeah, but I really, really don't like my voice. And so it was a matter of really trying to figure out how to bring out a little bit more of the resonance outside of the normal talking voice. And that's challenging, but it definitely, I think, comes across better on the vocal side of it.
Yes. Well, and talking about, like, kind of moving into our discussion about the Raven and just some of the elements of supernatural, psychological, a little bit of a horror element. When you guys have like read this for the first time, especially if you were younger, did you have a feeling of horror or suspense? Like, what was your kind of pivotal moment? The one thing, Jeannie and I were talking about this, the one thing that I've always kind of thought, and I've talked to different people, and everyone has kind of a different perspective at the end. And when talking about the shadow, leaving, at the end, I've always taken that as he died. That's just how I've always thought about that. And just, I mean, you can speak to what I'm saying, but also just what is your perspective of, like, what was the most suspenseful part of this poem?
Well, I'll just go ahead and start. I mean, I think you're right in the original writing. It really, I took it that way also, because the soul would not lift from the shadows. And so the shadows stayed there. And essentially that that stopped, you know, the life.
Mhm.
That was also the way I took it when I wrote the introduction that is prior to the story of the Raven that you have on the CD and that kind of stuff. And
Mhm.
it's kind of talking about what is the symbology of the Raven, and looking at different different nationalities, different time periods, you know, who saw the Raven as what, and what was it doing?
Right.
Was it escorting him to the afterlife? Was it trying to, you know, allow a gateway for Lenore to greet him? I mean, there was
Mhm.
all kinds of different symbolism that could come into it. I think you're absolutely right for the end of it, but you also notice at the end of mine, he's still alive and the Raven actually leaves.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
and so it's just a little bit of a change to it to make it not a story of his death, but more of a story of longing and difficulties with the passing of his wife.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to do it. And I know Jeannie brought up the aspect of grief when we were talking about this earlier.
Mhm.
Can you you want me to unmute you?
I got it.
There you
I
go.
just couldn't get my mouse to move right.
That's okay.
But you know, the thing of it is that, well, in my perspective and everything, there's always more than one type of death. You know, it's not physical death. Like with Jason, you said that his was still alive. Well, in the reading, you know, we all can interpret, because of Poe's great storytelling, he always leaves the reader the time and the understanding to put their own perspective into the story. So I see it both as it could be a physical death to where he's finally, you know, his soul is, you know, parting to go join Lenore, but also, as with anyone that has felt tremendous tragedy and grief, sometimes we die emotionally. And sometimes we have a mental issue that we have to overcome from the grief, and it changes the whole persona of who we are.
Yeah.
Like, whole identity can change. And I'm speaking from personal experience, because it was it can be a total identity crisis when you lose someone who is that much enmeshed into your life.
Yes.
One of the reasons with Poe is you could get that from his reading, and he brought the readers into that no matter what, but he didn't bash them to death with how he felt to how they should feel. It was always about himself and then what the reader can impart in the story. So that is my interpretation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And guys, feel free to jump in at any time to comment.
Sure. So I can say that I had, obviously I've been reading Poe. I mean, I discovered him on my own in the 4th grade. I had read tons of stuff. My freshman year of high school, though, I lost my very first and one of my closest friends. He unfortunately died. And it was a very tragic death. It didn't need to happen, and it did. And it really, really changed me. And it changed a lot of my friends that were, you know, in that circle with him. And what always gave me comfort, of course, was reading. And what did I love to read? Of course, I loved reading Edgar. And I remember after we got home from the funeral, I just kind of went into my room, grabbed a bunch of books, sat down on my bed, and I started reading. And the first thing I picked up was a collection of poetry. And of course, The Raven was in there, and I read that. And for whatever reason, it was like, I just all of a sudden, like, I realized I had changed. And at the end, it was like, as I was leaving the funeral home, as we're walking away from, you know, the casket, I was just like, a part of me is now gone, and it's now going through the store. And so, of course, as I'm reading that poem, like, I was like, okay, I get it. Like, and for some reason in my brain, it just clicked in me that a part of me was dead. I wasn't dead, but a part of me was dead because this person is now gone. And just like, you know, our narrator, you know, the Lenore, you know, she is gone. He is, and I always thought that he had died at the end of the poem because of the shadows. But of course, it could also be a part of his soul, part of his spirit. And that's how I felt, you know, when I was reading it. And it brought me comfort. And I was like, wow, okay, you got me.
Absolutely.
I can fully understand that, Virginia.
Yes.
Yeah, a part of me lost when my dad died, and it's never coming back. So totally understand that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually think too, like the book, like, so I'm really literal sometimes, and since the story is in first person, I never took it that he died. Because again, I'm like being real literal, but like at the end I took it as like soul death, because the Raven actually, he's like keeps saying like, am I going to see Lenore again? You know, he's coming from the Plutonian shore, from the afterworld. So is there a chance that I'm actually going to be reunited with my love, with this person that I want to be with? And he says no. So he has no hope. So there's no point for his soul to live on without ever seeing Lenore. So without Lenore, there is no point to living or going to the next, you know, whatever is next for him. So to me, I always took it as his soul dies that day, but his body lives on, empty, lonely, and miserable.
That's a unique perspective, definitely. Yeah. And interesting.
And Poe's very good about putting religion into his work.
Yes.
And the best thing about it is it's both sides of the religion, whether you're religious or you aren't religious, because he loves bringing in mythology, the Christianity, I mean, the pagan, all those different aspects. He is a virtuoso of religion.
And I really felt like too, you know, the lost Lenore. I mean, I've seen different perspectives, different, you know, articles written about the Raven and things, that the lost Lenore is definitely, you know, his wife. And then it's like, is the Raven his wife come back? You know, who did he really write this for? But then when you think about the time frame of when he wrote this, you know, it was right at the end of his life. I almost feel like this was every person that he had lost in his life, his mother, his, you know, father, his, you know, his foster mother, and, you know, and everyone. And it's like, it's all rolled into one. And I felt like it, you know, his entire soul was put into this particular work, even more than some of the other ones. That's just my thinking.
I think some of the analysis of the story kind of talks about how, you know, a lot of the women that he lost over the course of his life are all kind of rolled into the character of Lenore, you know, as kind of an embodiment of all the women he'd lost.
I kind of agree with that. Carmen, I do agree. Sorry, Carmen, with what you were saying. The first time I was assigned the Raven, of course, was in high school, and we want to thank my freshman English teacher who turned me on to Poe and kept me there. The first time I read it, I'm like, oh, this is kind of creepy. And then I just thought, I didn't think he died. I thought he just lost his mind. Then I got the history about Poe and realized that he had written it close to the end of his life. And then went back and reread it. And I've reread it a number of times since then. And I always get something new out of it. Kind of like Jeannie was saying, like, you know, death in two different planes. And the last time I read it, it clicked with me like, this is every loss he's had in his life wrapped up in this poem. It's like he's getting all this anguish out that he wants to express and put it on paper. It's like it's like he really doesn't have a therapist to go to, so he just pours it all out on the paper to get it out of his system, if that makes sense. Kind of like keeping a journal.
Yeah, because back in those days, therapy was not really often. Most of the time, his therapy, like many others at that time, was alcohol. So, and that in itself was causing its own issues. And one of the things that I like when we were listening to yours, Jason, is because it made me think of in certain cultures, like in the voodoo, how the shadows are souls following people around. And they are, they're always, whether they're good or evil, they are lurking. And so when he opens the door and he sees the raven, because the raven could be the physical embodiment of that angel of death, basically, kind of like what you said at the beginning.
Yeah.
And so those shadows that are always lurking, whether it be in your own mind, your own doubts, your own fears, your grief, horror, anything, those shadows are always the embodiment of something that you either miss, that you love, that is trying to break you down from the inside out, because it's all about self-doubt and self-harm. So, I remember the first time that I had a student that died, and it made a very big impact on me, because my niece, who was a good friend of his, told me after his funeral, she goes, "Aunt Jeannie, he thought you didn't like him." So even after his death, I'm still, reeling, because now I have like his shadow following me around, thinking that he died and he thought I didn't like him, so that's the other thing. It's like those ghosts of the past, for lack of a better way of saying it. That's one thing Poe does so well. He loves his Poe ghosts. So
yes. As I say, Jeannie bringing up like shadow people, you're going to make me think of Peter Pan with,
Right.
Sorry.
That's the first thing I thought of. Stitching the shadow back on. Yep.
Glad I'm not the only one that thought of that.
Yep.
Well, I was thinking about the more recent Walt Disney Tiana with the princess and the frog.
Yes.
He uses the shadows because he needs to get the soul type of thing.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So this is gonna sound kind of weird. So I know I agree with the sense that the raven is like a symbol of his grief, or literally, since the raven shows up at his house. But like, I actually learned this in high school. Not I learned, so I was taught this in high school. So since I know Jeannie and Carmen did have their time in high school teachers, that the raven could actually also symbolize guilt. That's there as a reminder that somehow he was responsible for this death of this loved one. So it's kind of like this guilty conscience, and that's kind of why it's still hanging out. Like, hey, you're not going to be reunited, but you're guilty, so I'm going to stay here and hover because you deserve to be haunted by me.
Yeah.
That was kind of like how we took it in our English class. But I mean, I kind of, when I read it as I was older, I mean, I didn't really get that from that. I'm thinking like he was like convinced that like he somehow murdered Lenore. But I was just kind of thinking it was like kind of that blur between the guilty conscience and he was grieving because he has blood on his hands essentially. And there is a lot of imagery of like the afterlife, and I mean, we know Poe was notorious for murder, but I don't know if anybody else kind of got any of those kind of vibes.
Well, I don't know how much of that may have been influenced by Gustave Doré's artwork.
That's true.
The interpretation of it, which was 40 years after the writing of the story when he illustrated that, and there was a significant amount of that afterlife and skeletal figures and
Reaper.
angels and demons and reapers and you name it. Yeah, and some of that could have shaped analysis.
Yeah, and I was going to say, Holly, that's a really good point to make. And thinking about like, he did add, Greek mythology and things like that into some of his works, and classical writers do that. I'm very entrenched in Romeo and Juliet with my students right now, so all of this is very fresh in my brain. And Shakespeare did the same thing, and Poe was not a big fan of Shakespeare, but but just like the bust of Pallas, Athena and wisdom and things like that. And
White
so
and black.
Yes, and you do wonder that, and and kind of Jason, you kind of said something at the beginning with that mythology, and it's like the raven is really more entrenched in Norse mythology, like that's Odin's, representation, and so you wonder, did Poe kind of dabble in all the different kind of mythologies, even though he really only incorporated Greek into many of his works? Just
in the
illusions.
Celtic and Norse mythology, it's a symbol of strength.
Yes.
So
yes.
so it's a different take on the raven, and what we typically symbolize it with, the carrion eaters and bringing death and that kind of stuff. So it's a little bit of a different look.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if they're kind of like a murder of crows, I think it's a conspiracy of ravens. There's a couple different terms for them. But I think conspiracy is one of them, which kind of would tie into the guilt, Holly.
Yeah.
And unconscious, no, something with the in it is another way.
Yeah, there's several different ways.
Yeah, there's like 7 different ones.
Yeah.
But speaking of your voice, you were doing the raven. It is very difficult when you have a voice that you kind of don't like. It's your own voice, and you're like, you listen to it when you're talking, but when you hear it on a recording, you're like, who's that?
Yeah.
That's not me. Okay. But I do like, because you have to play around with the pitch, the tone, the inflection, the mood. You have to embody all that, especially if you're just doing it via voice.
Yeah.
Which is why most who do voice acting don't do it very well, because they don't have that. But you really brought it out, because it was like, I could picture that you were actually Poe and speaking like as if you were reliving it or living it during that time, which is a true art form in itself. Because storytelling most of the time is all about building the imagery in the person's mind. And most of the time, the only thing you have to use is your voice and that inflection. And being a teacher, that's usually what our biggest tie is our voice, and getting people engaged, especially children who don't want to get engaged in reading. So you have to use what you have, and you do it very well, is what I'm getting around to. So
yes.
Well, and you want to also make a poem not sound like you're reading the Night Before Christmas, or that you're reading it and then move it. So you've got to stay engaged in the feeling of the line. Even when the line wraps, it's still part of the line, and keep it going, and the emotional value has to stay there. So that was a challenge for us when we were putting that together.
Yes, and Micah agreed with everybody on that, and I definitely agree as well. And just kind of talking about my students, they had to analyze a dream within a dream, and last week, and I told them, I said, before you do this, because they were doing this on their own, I said, we're going to read it aloud, because poetry, if you learn one thing from this class, poetry is meant to be read aloud. It's not to just, if you're by yourself, read it aloud, because you will appreciate it more, and you're going to understand it more when you do it the way it's supposed to be presented. Yeah. And I think some of my students kind of knew this, but a lot of them are kind of like, really? And then they're starting to get it. And it makes me happy, because teaching poetry to 14 and 15-year-olds is quite challenging. I love it, but they sometimes despise it. But they love Poe. They really do, and they know I love Poe. So.
But speaking about what you said about the interpretations of the artwork after the fact, 40 years after Poe actually wrote the poem, that in itself comes into play when you look at the other aspects of writers and the interpretation after the fact. Because when you were talking, you and Carmen and everyone, we were talking about ghosts and our interpretations of how we read things and see things and feel things. Charles Dickens popped in my head, because I always had this fight with my students, trying to get them to understand that Charles Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol as a ghost story.
Right.
was a ghost story. It's not, Santa's checking his list and making it, all that kind of crap. And that interpretation and the best reenactment, I guess, of that story, other than reading it, is the George C. Scott rendering.
100%.
Because that interpretation is so spot on as bringing out the ghost aspect of what Charles Dickens truly wanted from that story. And I think that's how some people do wrong by Poe, is what I'm getting around to, is they kind of just miss him. They miss, they apply too much of reading into things literally to the point to where you're losing the story, and you're losing the poet behind the story. And Poe, you can't lose Poe and his work. You just can't. Because if you leave him out, you're leaving out part of the story.
I agree with that 100%, Jean. Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you.
And
Go ahead. No, I'm done.
I would say Holly added the FX Christmas Carol with Guy Pearce is amazing.
If you haven't seen it, holy crap. That Christmas Carol, I can't even watch a different one anymore. And I've seen them all. I binge watch, be seriously. I've watched them all. That was amazing.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out. And Micah says, yeah, talk about ghosts. It's pretty intense. And then Jason also agreed. So yeah, that is one I'll definitely have to put on the list.
And while we're talking about interpretation, that's one that was a very different interpretation also. Okay. I mean, the way that one ended was significantly different. And I think I won't say it's good or bad. I mean, it was just different. I mean, you have to take it by itself because there's nothing else like it. So
okay.
I watched that one. Yeah, that just dawned on me. I'd seen that one and it completely threw me. The end. I'm like, whoa.
Yep.
Yeah, no spoilers. No spoilers.
Yeah, I know. No spoilers. Nothing coming out.
Now, who's Guy Pearce again? Somebody's gonna have to tell me who Guy Pearce is.
Guy Pearce.
Yeah, he's a very good actor. Very good actor.
Australian actor. When you see him, you'll know who he is.
You will.
Yeah.
You're talking to somebody that hasn't had her TV on since 2020. So
but we make you watch movies.
Yes, they do. And they get mad at me because I don't like things that they like. Because I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit or a lot.
He's Jack Irish. If you ask Jack Irish, that's his latest, most famous thing. I don't know.
No.
Okay, sorry.
Doesn't ring a bell. Sorry.
He did a
but
movie.
You said he had an Australian accent. Does he use the Australian accent in the movie?
He has a British accent in the Christmas Carol one. But it just kind of depends. He can lose it or change his accents. He's pretty much known for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the one thing I hate is when the Australian actors, the British actors, they always do an American accent, but they do a Southern accent. And it's like, you don't do that. Some of them can pull it off. Some of them cannot do it very well.
Well, I would like to state for the record that Harry Melling does it beautifully.
Yes.
And as a Virginian, he did it very well.
I agree. When he I know we're digressing, but we always do. In the movie, and Jeannie watched it. We had like a watch party at my house.
Pale blue eye watch party.
And when I couldn't wait to hear him speak as Poe, and I was just like, I was almost like, I hate to use the term fangirl, but I was like,
yeah, he was very charming, charming.
It made me gasp, and I went,
yeah.
Oh.
Yes.
Oh.
And one of our friends, I don't know if Jeannie noticed this, he looked at me when he first came on the screen to see my reaction. And I think he was happy that I had the reaction I did. But and then Micah said, who knew Harry Potter's bully would be such a good Poe?
I know.
That's awesome. Oh.
It was kind of creepy though. I mean, all the way through it, we kept saying he needs a mustache.
Yeah.
It was just
the mustache didn't actually happen until later on in life.
I know, but
he didn't have a mustache for a very long time.
Yeah.
He just looked too creepy for some odd reason because he looked too much like Poe, in my opinion.
It was the eyes.
Yeah.
Dude, you're a walking skeleton.
Yeah, that's
Very intense eyes.
eyes.
And Poe was technically 18 when he was at West Point, so he was very,
True.
very young.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very young.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Very skinny, young, naive.
Didn't do so well there, with the old
Ooh.
court martial business, but
Yeah.
There were reasons for that.
Yes.
Well, going back to the Raven, just kind of hearing a lot of these different perspectives, it makes me kind of like, anytime I've read this, I can't tell you how many times just on my own, but also teaching it. And I've read it to several groups at school, young children to like middle school teens, and then to high school students. Just I dressed up as Poe one day when I was an administrator at a different high school, and I went to all the freshman classes and read it. And I had this little candle. We turned out the lights. I didn't have a wig at the time, so I just pulled my hair back, and I did put on a mustache, and they were like, "She's weird." I said, yes. And so, but anyway, but kind of like what Keith said, I always get something different out of it every time I read it. And, one of the things that I've even looked at is, what's the story before the speaker gets to this point when the Raven comes in? And I would love to think about, what did Poe have in mind in his writing process? Did he think about the end before he began the poem, or did he just start writing one day and decide to do this? And so, but you really wonder, what if you could go back and talk to Poe and ask him, what happened to this man? What is the real story? It would be very interesting. And I think everybody would have a different perspective of, like what Holly said, did he murder his wife? Or, did she just die suddenly? Was it like Virginia and she had tuberculosis or something? And I would love to tell the tale. Yeah, I think it'd be really neat.
I know that, that when I had read The Raven before, the Raven represented guilt. The one time I read it, it represented death. And then there's now one take on it I got, and I could be totally off base, but this was just me. I was reading it this time. I'm like, well, maybe we'll have a happy ending this time. You know how even though you read it over and over, you think something different's going to happen.
Yes.
Like watching a movie you see all the time and you want the character to live.
Yes.
And I was like, suppose the Raven came to relieve him of his guilt.
Okay.
I thought maybe that was a symbol to take the guilt away. I mean, it just, I was probably in my late 20s then, so something must have happened to get me to read it again. So I can't remember that far back anymore. So it's just...
We're not that old, Keith. Come on. don't make us like, my grandmother. I think of my grandmother.
My 20s were a blur. So
I think most of our 20s were a blur.
Yes.
Yeah, I had a lot of bartender friends.
Exactly.
do it.
I mean, that was just one of the takes on it I've had.
Yeah, that's another unique perspective, to think that the Raven is taking away his guilt. But all of these are plausible. I mean, they really are, just based on your own, like, to me, everyone's own experience in kind of thinking, comparatively, metaphorically, I guess you'd say.
I think that's what great poetry does.
Yes.
It inspires something in you that you relate to, and it doesn't have to be 100% exact as the interpretation of the writer. It's the interpretation of the reader, and that's what I love about poetry, and this does the exact same thing.
And to throw this out from what Keith was saying, how come we keep going back and pulling in different stories at different times? Is it that we're being drawn in because we remember Poe, or is it our own life station at the time that is making us identify that story with ourselves? So it's not necessarily Poe, but it's just that particular story, because it could be something else. Like, I keep getting drawn most of the time to the Masque of the Red Death. Especially during the pandemic. That's the one that just, I mean, it was the moment that it's like, okay, I've seen this before. Okay. I've heard this somewhere before. It's like being in a classroom. It's like being at the Mask of the Red Death, It's like going from class to class. Oh, which door is this going to be? Okay. I digress. But it's like Jason said, the mark of a true writer, a true storyteller is, imprinting onto that part of your psyche. So what would be going on in your life at that moment pulls you back, and you see something different because you're experiencing something different. You are in a different frame of mind. You are grown older. You might be sober for the first time in a while. So, because if you're in your 20s, okay, 30, a little over the hump. By the time you get to 40, you're like, what happened? So you go back and reread things because you want to remember them, that you actually read it and you didn't hallucinate it. But
that's true.
Right.
That is very
and then we
true.
won't get to the next decade, but okay. Technically, I'm still in my infancy in that area, so we're
not for long. She's got a birthday next month.
That's it. Nobody asked you. So do you. So hey, don't want to hear it.
Yeah, I know, but I'm already older than you, so
exactly. Yeah, I like rubbing that in their faces. Although there's still 2 in our group who's younger than me, and I'm like, I don't want to hear it. They're still in their 40s for a while.
Yes.
Those crazy 40-year-olds.
Exactly. Those crazy 40-year-olds. And why do I feel like 30-year-olds are like my children? Oh, that's right. I'm old enough for them to be my children.
Oops, sorry.
I digress once more. Let's go back to this. Now, see, I want to go read another one of Poe, like the Telltale Heart, because I need to cut my heart out and dig it somewhere. Because,
Gina, you're in full form tonight.
Well,
it's been one of those days. I can't help it. The weather. I'm blaming it on the weather.
Hey, both the Raven and the Telltale Heart were written in January, just different, a couple years apart. So
That's
you're
right.
good either way.
Now I know why. I'm experiencing what Poe did. Like I can feel why he wrote those at that time.
Yes. Absolutely.
Because I think of it during that time, and that is very much a high, suicide rate during the holidays, during the cold weather months. That could have had some influence on what he was writing and when.
Yeah.
Yeah, that hasn't changed.
He starts out with a bleak December, right? So there you have it.
Yep.
Yes.
There you go.
Yes, absolutely.
Here's some good news to lighten the mood. There's
All right.
7 weeks until spring.
Yay! Okay.
I got that in an email this morning. I went, yes.
All right. That is actually fantastic news. That is wonderful.
Right. Which one of you is the closest to Pennsylvania so you can take out that groundhog?
I'm in Pennsylvania.
There you go. So I
Take out the
volunteer
groundhog.
you. Yeah, exactly. You get to go hunting on February the 2nd. Take him out.
I gotta go all the way up there. Oh my
Exactly.
gosh. It's like a 4.5 hour drive to go get Phil.
Yeah.
Yep.
Take Phil out. You can bring him down to Tennessee and we throw him on the, roadside cafe. It'll be fun.
Oh, Jeannie.
Nah, I'll keep him in my basement and then he won't see anything.
There you go.
How about that?
Yes, let's
Exactly.
keep Jeannie. We're
Groundhog
keeping him
Groundhog
alive.
Abduction 101. There we go.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hey, wall him up like Poe, in Poe style. Wall him up
Yeah.
downstairs in the
That's
basement.
Well,
it.
in my basement,
The cask of
there is
Puxatawny.
this- Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. So I do
Doesn't-
have this little space in my basement that's kind of like waiting for me to put doors on it because it's just this like cutout space
Oh, neat.
Ooh.
and it goes to nowhere.
Mm.
Oh,
About
wow.
4 feet by 6 feet in height, maybe 6 or 7.
Exactly.
It's about 4.5 feet wide. It probably goes back about 5.5 to 6 feet, probably.
Hey, there you go.
Not enough space for a groundhog that doesn't need to see his shadow ever.
Exactly. He's a groundhog. He'll be fine.
Oh,
He lives underground. That's why he's a ground,
Right.
I was going to say, we're going to start quoting Once Upon a Midnight
Midnight
February
Dreary.
2nd.
A groundhog come knocking at the door.
Oh my
Mhm.
goodness.
Oh my God, if that groundhog ever comes to my door and knocks.
Oh my gosh, Micah, this is brilliant. He just said the groundhog 4 weeks more or 6.
Oh, dang.
Exactly.
Yep.
Oh.
Never more,
Oh, that was
Punxsutawney
priceless.
Phil.
And that is
Yep.
just
Oh.
extending the influence Poe has on everything. Just
Yeah.
even groundhogs.
Yep.
Hey, Poe could be the groundhog, because
Oh,
reincarnation
gee.
could be a thing.
Okay, maybe.
Because in India, they think you get reincarnated as a cow. So he could have been reincarnated as Punxsutawney Phil.
Speaking of
Shadow.
Poe, which I've discovered recently, since this Pale Blue Eye, this one, and I got the book like you suggested, and holed up last weekend and read it, and then did my thing. But I have discovered a whole series of books where he is either a character in it, like a detective, or just a bit part. And the newest one I got in the mail today is called Dark Rooms, or Two Dark Rooms or something. But this kid, this teenager, finds this room off of his room that was walled up, and it's a secret room, and he finds this journal, and it seems that the murders that start happening in the town all go back to a Poe story, like the Telltale
Oh.
Heart, to the Dance of the Red, Mask of the Red Death. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, neat.
I haven't gotten into it. I've gotten enough into it, like, I can't put this down, but I had to because I had book club tonight. But it was just like, but each of the murders is based on one of his stories. Not all of them, but like Black Cat.
Nice.
That
Because that
is-
movie, The
No.
Raven, with John Cusack was kind of like that. Even though John Cusack, in my opinion, is the worst Edgar Allan Poe ever. He's horrible, in my opinion. But that movie was, yeah.
Oh, I'm hurt.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, he had a Van Gogh. He's supposed to have a mustache. You're not playing John Cusack. You're playing Edgar Allan Poe. Shave it and have a mustache, dude. Sorry. I couldn't. The whole time I'm like yelling, why is he wearing a Van Gogh when he's Edgar Allan Poe? Oh, I'm sorry. And he's
He was
a
having
mouth.
a
The whole time
dinner.
his mouth is open. He's like, close your mouth and breathe through your nose. Like, ew. Henry Melling was way better Edgar Allan Poe. I was like going like this as I'm like, he was a great Poe. Sorry.
All right.
Stop my
No, you just gotta appreciate The Raven for some of what it is. And I am a
Yes.
huge
Yeah, the
John
story was
Cusack
good.
fan.
yes.
So I was like, John's playing like my man. Okay, I'm in. I didn't
I
care how
had
bad
high
it was.
hopes before I watched it because I watched it for the first time recently. I had really high hopes going into it, and then I was just like, wow, like, yeah. But the story was kind of like what Keith was saying. It had the story was good, even though the acting was not so good.
Yeah.
But sorry, in my opinion. But that'd be it's called The Door. What was it called, Keith? A Room with Two Doors?
Or Two Dark Rooms, or Dark Rooms. Oh, hold on a minute. Let me get it. It's in my stack right here on the board.
Okay, and I was going to type it into the chat once he brings his book back. Yeah, one thing I would love to see, the book, The Pale Blue Eye, is the only book that he wrote a Poe character in. And has everybody seen the movie? So, like,
Yeah,
if
I
I
haven't read
say
the book
something,
yet.
okay,
No,
well, it's
I have
very
not.
much like the book. But has everybody seen the movie? They know what happens.
No, but you can talk about it. That's
They
fine. I
have
don't.
Are you sure?
Okay.
I don't want to give anything away.
No,
But
go for it.
I gave you
Okay.
the wrong
I
title.
would love to see Harry Milling being Poe in other things.
In
Like,
a series.
yes.
Yeah.
But unfortunately that can't happen from the Louis Bayard writing the book based on the ending. But it was like, to me, somebody could take, well, really, or just have Harry Milling just cast him in some Poe movies and things.
Sorry, I'm laughing at Micah's comments.
Oh, what did you saw it and loved it? Pale Blue Eye 2, Pale. Oh, that's great.
Hell harder.
Awesome.
Yeah, like that.
That is awesome. All right, Keith, what's the name of the book?
Okay, I gave you the title of another book
That's
in another
okay.
stack. The book I got today is called Room of Shadows by Ronald Kidd.
Room of Shadows by Ronald. Is it Kidd?
Kidd.
Okay.
And it's about a kid, his mother starting over. They move into a dilapidated house. Blah blah blah. He finds an ancient desk and a carving of a raven beckon to him, and suddenly violence seems to follow him everywhere. And the terrible events happening around him and the stories of Edgar Allan Poe have a tie together. Has he unleashed a dark force by opening the room, or has the room awakened something in David that he doesn't recognize? But what got me was the Edgar Allan Poe lead into it. And I'm like, oh, I've got to read this.
Okay. Yeah, I'll be anxious to hear how it is.
Well, it's in the stack that I started in the living room, and then I've got another one in the bedroom, and then I got one in the kitchen and one in the dining room. I read wherever I land. Sometimes I just pick up something and read it.
Oh, absolutely.
I hear ya. I've got a library full of books just out here in Virginia, and with my house back in California, I don't have all my books here with me.
Oh,
no.
Yeah.
So I downsized when I moved, so I donated a lot.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, but I'm building it back up quickly.
Oh, that's great.
I'm addicted to Audible, so I'm saying, Jason, I'm glad you saw that thing and you're available on Audible. I'm like addicted to that. Once you start, you can't stop.
No.
Yeah, I listen to a lot of books on my way to school and on my way home, and also listen to podcasts. And Virginia, it was like every day I was like listening to all of your episodes, going to school, and I was like, I can't wait to listen to them. It was like you were on my road trip every day.
Oh my gosh. Well, I was listening to you guys this morning too. So
oh, great. Yes.
I'm sorry.
And we managed, I will say this, we managed to not spoil the movie, our new episode.
Oh, good.
At
Okay.
the end of recording, we were like, oh my God, we did not spoil that. How did we do that?
Oh, that's awesome.
I have no idea. Yeah. So it is spoiler free.
Oh, that is awesome.
Nice.
Well
Which
done.
podcast does Virginia do, if I missed it?
That's okay. We have a podcast called Beyond the Oblong Box.
Okay. Okay. Now it's hit me.
Yeah.
Well, Virginia, did you see that one of our audio dramas is manuscript found in a bottle?
Oh.
Yeah, that was one of the ones that he wrote prior to the Oblong Box.
Yes.
As one of the precursors to that story. So yeah, that was awesome. I really enjoyed doing that one.
Off to Audible.
No, that one's not on Audible. I've
not
got
on
that
Audible?
one on. It's on my YouTube channel, and it's out the entire full audio dramas there. Same thing with The Raven. It's on my YouTube channel as well.
Okay.
Markiewitz Audioworks presents on YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah, and manuscript found in the bottle I have not listened to yet, but I'm anxious to do that because that's I was say, hey Kitty, what is your kitty's name?
This is Elliot. He does like to crash. He's the one that likes to crash the party the most when Levi and I are recording.
Yes.
So no different. He knows it.
I was gonna say, because that's the story that Poe won the Saturday Visitor Award.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, I have it's awesome to I have maybe a minute and a half or so of an intro prior to the story beginning, and I kind of go over why the story was done and the results of his contest.
Oh, very neat. Very neat.
Very cool.
Well, I was going to say thank you, Jason, for posting that on
the
comments.
Thank you, Jason.
To check him out. And I've listened to part of the Cask of Amontillado as well, and it's phenomenal. I mean, Jason, honestly, all your work is really good. Fun. I bet.
Yeah. Bunch of theater actors getting together to do audio dramas, there you have it. It's fun.
Oh yeah. And I can only imagine. But we're nearing the end of our time. We usually go hour-ish, roughly. And we usually digress like we do, and that's what's so fun. But we keep the essence of Poe alive, throughout all of our conversations and our love of Poe. And so, Jason, will you just share out the list of productions that you've done on Poe? I know you've kind of woven them in throughout, but just so everybody can kind of know what to look forward to.
Sure. So we started with a requirement, quote unquote, to get a body of work. And the body of work we started with were short stories from Edgar Allan Poe. So our first one was The Raven. Then we moved to The Cask of Amontillado. And that one actually was an Audio Theater Central Seneca Award nominee last year. So it did very well as a People's Choice Award nominee for the top 5 in that award cycle. So we're pretty proud of that. Then we had Manuscript Found in a Bottle, which I did individually with Hayden's music as well. But that was awesome because I played all the different roles myself, spliced them in, background effects, the old captain, the Swedish guy. I actually had to learn Swedish to say some things in Swedish during that story, but that was a lot of fun. And it was Hayden's first musical work with anything nautical. And so it really took a lot of, back and forth to try to figure out what kind of a vibe do we want from the sea story for that one. It was a lot of fun. Then we just released The Telltale Heart on Halloween this last year, and that just got reviewed by Broadway Sacramento, and that was a real nice review that came out there for that one. And then we are currently finished recording, and it is in production now for Mask of the Red Death. And then once we get those 5 done, then that'll be the conclusion of our 5 that we were going to do as our Poe series. We'll put it all together in a compilation that we're going to plan to have out next year. And we've got a few titles going around right now, but the one we've kind of settled on is Death Upon a Midnight Dreary. And that's going to be the compilation of those 5 stories, and that'll be out next year.
That sounds amazing.
Very awesome.
Very cool.
And what is it you're going to do after Poe? The other night on Thursday, you have some kind of idea that you're going to delve into what next?
Well, it is, audio drama creation and production is just a passion project. It's something we love to do. It's not about financial gains. It's about producing hopefully a very good product and that everyone can enjoy. We did 2 Christmas productions this last year with 3 Christmas trees and then A Visit from St. Nicholas, otherwise known as 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. We did those 2. And then now we're looking at a longer project. And we've always talked about the Treasure Island being our first long project, and that's most likely what we're going to go to, but it's about writing it a little bit differently, because one of the things I've tried very diligently to do over the course of all of our works is present something different in each of the stories, either new characters, new dialogue, new formatting, some way to make it to where, okay, here we go, iteration 4000 of The Raven. Well, I want it to be something different that's uniquely ours, and so I want Treasure Island to be the same way if we do that. And it'll take a little bit of a time writing the script, but it's going to be something that has a unique angle built into it that we're working on.
Wow.
That sounds awesome. Coming up.
Yeah.
And more sound effects.
Always been my favorite. So, actually have a 1902 copy of Treasure Island that I found at an old yard sale one time. It's not the greatest condition, but it's like when you can find those in that shape, and whoever had it, they wrote things on the, how people make notes inside. And it's amazing to find those kinds of treasures in Treasure Island. Okay.
Yes.
And I'm starting to do that. So.
Well, and I was going to say, you can definitely end that with Poe is a treasure forevermore. And just had to link that together. But,
I'm not the only fun one here.
No, yeah, I can pun it up when I'm not too tired.
Oh, puns, love it.
But so we always end, kind of the evening with what we're going to do next month and kind of give you a date. So February 28th will be our next Poe Unplugged, and we hope everybody can join us again. We always try to do it around the last Tuesday of the month. And we are going to look into the Mask of the Red Death. So
one of my favorites.
Love it.
Yes,
Excellent.
There's so many elements you can talk about with that story, and even talk about, like, if we may probably, when we advertise it on the website and on Facebook and Twitter, we'll probably suggest, just for some, the fun aspect of it, just to get those colors that come alive, is watching Vincent Price, the Roger Corwin movie.
Oh my gosh.
Corwin movie.
Yes.
So
Crazy.
yes.
Got a copy of it.
Yes.
Oh, awesome. I was gonna say, I think Micah had responded with, let's see, Hold on, I thought it saw it. Oh no, Crystal, love the 3D like effects during the audio. Made you feel like you were there. Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sorry,
that's
I've been waiting the whole time to say this because my sister can vouch for this. I love having books read to me and listening to old school audio. Remember the VHS tapes and all that stuff and little cassette tapes. There was
Yes.
no like background music to it. So I kind of like made my own thing. I'm like, oh, it's like 3D now. So I just had to say that, Jason. It was cool that as you were
Nice, thank
going, all
you.
that 3D stuff was happening in the background. It kind of almost gave you a visual like you were watching a movie. So it was really cool.
Neat.
Excellent. Yeah. And in fact, that's our tagline is a theater in your mind. So as long
Oh, I
as
love
it's
that.
built that
I
way,
love that.
that's the way we want it to come across.
Very cool. Well, all right. Well, we thank everybody for joining us, and we love having everybody on here. It's just amazing. And Jason, thank you so much for coming on with our first Facebook Live event last week. He was our Gothic guest in our newsletter, and as well as tonight. You've added a whole lot to this month, and we appreciate it very much.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me and having me. Thanks, everybody. Nice to meet everybody.
All right.
Yeah, thanks,
All
Jason.
right. So everyone have a great evening, and we thank you so much.
Night.
Bye,
Yeah,
y'all.
thank you.
See you next
Bye.
month.
Bye. See
All
you
right.
next
Bye
time.
bye.
Yeah.